what is psychology in your mind? Psychos, as Vita pointed out, that comes to mind. Sitting on a couch, telling everyone what's going on in your world. Counseling, like Blake mentioned. What else? Anyone think of the way nations interact with each other? You have two powerful leaders of a nation. Think of the psychology that goes on whenever they meet face to face. There's a lot of human psychology that goes into that. And you better believe there are people behind the scenes analyzing that piece of it and giving tips on how to best maneuver those conversations. But beyond that, how do you think psychology affects your everyday life? How many people here have a personality? Yes, you all have a personality. Do you think that's psychology? Yes, absolutely it is. That's a whole field of psychology, personality, a whole branch of it. And we'll be getting into that. What makes us tick? What makes us like we are? What makes us introverted versus extroverted? What makes us be go-getters versus laid back? That's all part of the study of psychology. Early pioneers viewed it as the science of mental life. Your textbook says that psychology can be defined as the scientific study of the behavior and thinking of organisms. That's a bit dry, but that's what they say. Psychology is the science of behavior and mental processes, and that's the one we're going to kind of roll with for today. So, the Greek part of this, it comes from a Greek word, psyche, meaning mind, and logos, meaning the study of. And behavior can be defined as anything a human, or animal for that matter, does. Sound pretty broad? Well, psychology is pretty broad. Mental processes that are internal states we infer from behavior, such as thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. And so this can be, let's say for example, have you ever heard someone say, "Hey, I feel your pain"? Do you think they're actually feeling your pain? Okay. So someone comes up and says, "Oh man, I just had an injury and I broke my rib and I can't even breathe without sharp pain shooting up through my chest." "Oh man, I feel your pain." Well, no, you don't really, but you pick up on visual cues that they're giving you. They're slumped over, they're grabbing their side, they're taking shallow breaths, and you're noticing what's going on. You're hearing them speak, telling the story of what happened, and you're identifying with them like, "Oh, that is a terrible thing." You're empathizing with them. That's all a mental process, and that's what part of psychology studies. It addresses everything from anxiety and depression to why people commit mass murders, and attempts to explain how we develop mentally, socially, emotionally, etc. There's an old saying that says, "As at 7, so at 70." And the basic idea is what kids are when they're 7 years old. There's a lot of truth that they behave in similar patterns until the day they die. So what is it about personality that persists over time that drives us? Of course, there's some ebb and flow and change as experience molds that. But what is it about that that shifts things or maintains it, keeps it the same? So what's the point in studying psychology? A few questions, and I'll just run through these. Have you ever wondered, do parenting styles affect children? I see lots of head nodding yes. Maybe you've seen, and don't identify this as your own family of origin, but parents who treat their children in a way that brings out the best in them, that their children just thrive and grow, and parents who maybe are less capable of parenting in a positive way, and their children pull back or close within or struggle. Can sports-related concussions wipe out recent memories? There's a big debate on this within the NFL right now, where the mental impact of having your body slammed to the ground again and again and again affects your ability to think clearly, have coherent memories. So it's a big field or big discussion within psychology. Why did God create emotions? Does God have emotions? Does God get angry? Does God get happy? Does everyone dream? I have a little 2-year-old daughter at home, and I ask her this question about every morning. Hey Grace, did you sleep good? Yes. Did you dream? Yes. What did you dream about? 2 puppies. Were they nice puppies? Yes. Did they lick your face? Yes. And that's the conversation about every morning. Actually, it changed. It was 2 meow meows, and now it's 2 puppies. So maybe the dream has shifted. I don't know. Does the brain have its own built-in painkillers? You ever known someone who has a crazy high pain tolerance and someone else who has a crazy low pain tolerance? What's going on there? Why is that? Why do grief reactions vary so widely? In some cultures, it's not uncommon for people to be very expressive with their grief. They will mourn and weep and wail for days on end in front of their house. And for others, they shut the door and no one comes in for months. It's very quiet. It's very private. Why the difference? What's up with that? What causes deja vu? Anyone ever had that? I've been here before. I've done this before. And why are habits so hard to break? Anyone ever committed to yourself that you were going to get up at the same time every morning and found that a week later you were still getting up at random times and sleeping until noon? Why is it so hard to set that new pattern or to break one you don't want? You seem to be identifying a little bit with that one. Trust me, I think we all can identify with that one. But patterns that you want to break. Maybe you want to quit in a speech saying the word You never done that? That's really hard to do. Why is that so hard to break? Psychology can give you some insight into that. A few other reasons. First of all, to know God better. I think when we better understand His creation, the way He made us, it gives us some insight into who He is and why He made us. An example would be emotions. God created us with these emotions. Why? What does that tell us about the nature of God that He wanted emotional beings? Does that give us insight into how He experiences life? To know other people better. One of my main hopes for this class is that you learn what makes people tick better, what makes you tick, for the sole purpose of being able to better interact with people around you. Not everyone's going to go into maybe full-time ministry, but everyone's going to be involved in ministry of some kind. Because as a Christian, ministry is life. This is what we do. Whether you're working a 9-to-5 job at the bank or whether you are a full-time pastor. And knowing how to interact with people and how to speak to them in ways they can understand and hear, in ways that you can meet their needs, that's going to give you a clear door into their life. And just think what you can do with that open door as God opens those doors for you. To know yourself better. I can't remember which ancient philosopher, I want to say Aristotle, maybe Socrates, said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And the basic idea is if you live your entire life on autopilot, completely unaware of what's going on inside of you, you're going to kind of be a ship that's tossed in the waves of life without anyone at the rudder giving it guidance. Okay, so the better you know yourself, the better equipped you will be to live this life in a way that's meaningful, that you can have an impact on those around you. So, let's jump into the who's who in psychology. And it's helpful to understand where the field came from. Some of this will be on a test, just so you know. He was the first to create a psychological laboratory in Germany. It looks like it's pronounced Wilhelm Wundt. It's pronounced Wilhelm Wundt because he's German. So the W becomes a V. Wilhelm Wundt. You should also know that just about everyone in the field of psychology has epic beards. So just be prepared for that. Even the women had beards. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Sought to measure the fastest and simplest mental processes. So I will replicate his first psychological experiment for you. It's that simple. So he took people into a room, and he had I think it was a piece of metal or something that he had them hold, or he held, and then he had people sitting at a table, and whenever they would hear the metal hit the ground, they had to tap the bell. And he measured their reaction times between the time the sound was created when the metal hit the ground and the time that they hit the bell. How many of you think of that when you think of psychological experiment? No, we think of like people in a dark room for days on end measuring the psychosis that is created by isolation. No, that's not the first psychological experiment. It's as simple as measuring reaction time. That's a mental process. Your brain takes in information, it hears something, you react, and there's a whole process that goes on inside your brain with that. The registering of the sound, the sending of neural activity down to your arm to actually hit the button, the time it takes to do that. There's a lot of science and psychology that goes into that. So that was the first psychological experiment. And I think it's the next piece. We're actually going to recreate that experiment today. So I need 4 volunteers, preferably 2 guys and 2 girls. All right, 1, 2, 3, and I need 1 more guy. There we are. Come on forward. So while I'm doing this, I'm going to teach you what a psychology experiment is as well. So we're going to recreate Wilhelm Wundt's first psychological experiment. And I'm going to have each of you do a test here on the computer to measure your reaction time. And so while I'm doing that, I'm going to highlight what a psychological experiment looks like. It's pretty simple. So we are going to create a hypothesis. So I'll give you 2 options to choose from. Guys are faster than girls, or girls are faster than guys in reaction time. And I'm going to have you vote on which you think is correct. So how many think that guys are faster than girls? Raise your hand. Okay, 3. How many think that girls are faster than guys? Okay, so the overarching agreement is that girls are faster than guys. So that's our hypothesis. Our theory is going to be that if we perform this test and measure reaction times between 2 guys and 2 girls, the girls are going to be faster than the guys. That's consistent with our hypothesis. And so now we're going to move to the experimentation phase. And can someone write down these reaction times for me? Any volunteers? Great, thanks, Michael. So I will show you how this works. We're going to click to start, and then when this turns green, we're going to click, and it's going to give you the reaction time right there. Okay? Pretty simple. So what was your name again?
Cameron.
Cameron. All right, Cameron, you're going to go first. So, well, whenever you're ready, you can click that, and then wait for it to turn green. Okay, 221 milliseconds. Thank you, Cameron. You can go and have a seat. All right, you can come over. What was your name?
Tyler.
Tyler, all right. Whenever you're ready, go ahead and click. 262. All right, thanks, Tyler. You can come on over. What was your name?
Carissa.
Carissa.
There's like 50 Carissas.
273. Thank you. And what was your name? Abby. 299. All right, so I think both of the guys had faster reaction times than the girls. So what do we do with that from a psychological experiment? We revamp our hypothesis, our theory, and we realize, oh, well, our study informs us that, at least in this case, guys tended to be faster than girls. And so therefore we would recreate the experiment, change your hypothesis, adjust and move forward. That type of study is what drives the field of psychology forward. You come up with a theory, you test that theory to see if it's accurate, and then you adjust based on the results that you find. And you keep moving that process forward again and again and again. All right, let's move on to William James. William James was a pretty famous psychologist, especially right around the turn of the century. His most famous work was called The Principles of Psychology. And actually, I think we have that book down in our library. I was looking around there one time and I think I found it. He mentored Mary Whiton Calkins, who was the first female president of the APA, the American Psychological Association, or Psychiatric Association. The interesting thing is, she went through Harvard, which at that time was primarily a men's school, outscored all of her male classmates in the psychology department, and Harvard refused to issue her a degree because she was a woman. And they offered her a secondary degree from their women's only college, which she refused, and then eventually went on to become the first female president of the APA. Both faith and biology influenced his view of psychology. He was faith-based, he was a Christian man, and so that influenced how he viewed psychology. How many have heard of him? Sigmund Freud. There's a lot of, he's kind of a punchline in a lot of jokes, especially depending on your circles that you run in. But he was probably one of the most famous psychologists of his day, and his name still carries a lot of weight today. The field has accepted some of his ideas and rejected many, and so we'll get into some of those at a different day, different point in time. He primarily focused on personality. He had a tremendous influence on the field. How many of you have heard of a Freudian slip, where you accidentally say what you really are thinking? That's called a Freudian slip. Anyway, we'll get into it. There's a whole bunch of stuff that he came up with that still carries over to some of it today. He proposed that personality was broken up into three parts: the id, the ego, and the superego. Anyone ever heard of those before? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that now because there's another lecture where we will get into those. You will have to know some of those for the test, so just mark that to come back to. He proposed the idea of the subconscious. Until Freud came along, that idea wasn't in existence. The subconscious being the part of our brain where things are running, things are happening, but it's not actually coming to the surface for us where we can actually engage with that idea. It can have a very driving force in the background of our mind, but it's in our subconscious. He was strongly against religion, and if you hear a little bit about his story, there's a reason that developed in his life, but he was very anti-religious. And because of that, he's not well loved in Christian circles, and not without good reason. And our task will be sorting through his ideas to figure out what is consistent with Scripture and helpful, and what is not, and what needs to be rejected. And that, again, jumping back to one of the objectives of this course, is one of the purposes. I want you to be able to understand and know how to think critically about the ideas in psychology, how to sort through those secular ideas and pick away from them the things that are consistent with our faith and reject the things that are not. A little clip about his life. Will it be a problem to turn the lights off for this?
Sigmund
Freud was an Austrian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis, and was born in Freiburg in Moravia, but moved to Vienna with his family in 1857. He was an exceptionally gifted child and an excellent student. He attended medical school in Vienna and became involved in neuropsychology research and studied in Paris and Nancy with some of the most prominent psychologists of the time. After spending some time in Berlin, he returned to Vienna and set up a psychiatric practice. He adopted a new form of treatment with his patients that involved talking about their problems to trigger emotional release, known as repression, which is now widely seen as the basis for psychoanalysis. Freud's theories were well received, but he had many disagreements with other psychologists at the time, most notably the psychologist Carl Jung. In 1923, Freud developed a benign mouth tumor associated with his heavy smoking, which he had to have removed. After the outbreak of World War II, Freud went into exile in Hampstead, London, where he continued his work. In 1939, his mouth tumor returned, and he requested the help of his friend Max Schur to assist him in committing suicide. Schur gave Freud large doses of morphine, which ultimately led to Freud's death. Amongst other achievements, Freud contributed to research into cerebral palsy, psychoanalysis, and investigations into the conscious and unconscious minds of his patients. He also investigated dream interpretation and was a strong advocate of repression techniques to revisit repressed memories that have been buried or repressed by the patient, as well as psychosexual therapies. Although a controversial figure, Freud's contributions to psychiatry and psychoanalysis have altered the direction and focus of many psychiatric methods and techniques.
Right. And again, we'll be getting into some of Freud's theories later on, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time focusing on them today. B.F. Skinner started the wave of behaviorism. He was one of the most famous and influential American psychologists. How many were born before 1990? Anyone in here born before 1990? Wow, Jason is the only one. Okay, I was going to say he was alive during your lifetime, but that was not the case apparently. And I feel really old in this moment, but it's okay. He believed that you could not study the internal workings of the mind, but only observable behavior. And he was reacting against some people who, say Ivan Pavlov, for example. We'll get into Ivan Pavlov, but Pavlov's first dabble into psychology was trying to get inside the mind of animals. What were the animals thinking? What were they feeling? And hypothesizing about what they could be. And Skinner's looking at that and saying, no, that's ridiculous. We can't get inside the mind. The only thing we can do is observe the behavior. And so he created what's called the Skinner box, which is a kind of small device that measures animals' behavior. Like, for example, how many times a pigeon pecks at a spot on the wall, and then you quantify that and draw scientific conclusions, psychological conclusions from their behavior. And it wasn't just animals, it extended to human relations as well. He laid the foundation for a major wave in psychology called behaviorism. His techniques are still heavily used in things like how to reward children for positive behavior. Have you ever seen a sticker chart where you reward kids for cleaning up their room or whatever? And when you get so many stickers, then you get this. That was based in one of his theories coming out of behaviorism. Carl Rogers led a new wave in psychology away from behaviorism towards person-centered theory. See, one of the downsides, if you can call it that, of behaviorism is that it didn't take the internal workings of emotions into account as thoroughly as it should. And so Rogers kind of reacted against that and said, no, there's a whole lot more going on internally than we realize, and we have to take that into account. And he emphasized the role the environment plays in health and growth. His theory says that if you provide a safe, warm, empathetic, genuine environment for someone in a relationship, that they will naturally grow and heal and prosper. And so that's kind of formed the foundation. And he had 3 keys for successful therapy. He said that every therapeutic relationship, in other words, a counselor sitting down with the client, has to have these 3 things. There has to be genuineness, where you are authentically who you are with that person. You're not putting up a facade, but you're being genuine with them. You're not lying to them and putting up a false front. You show them unconditional positive regard, which means that everyone is worthy of respect, regardless of who they are, where they've been, what they've done. And so you show them a sense of respect in the therapeutic relationship. And I can assure you, when someone doesn't have that, they don't sense that respect coming from you. And let me clarify, respect doesn't mean approval. I'm not saying those two things are equal. But knowing that someone is worthy of being loved, that can be a very powerful thing in a therapeutic relationship. And empathetic listening. You are walking with them through their journey. You're showing empathy and care through the way that you talk to them, your vocal tone, body language. So much goes into that. I'm going to keep rolling through this because I think we're kind of running a little low on time. So, switching gears into psychology and Christianity and how we kind of sort through those two things. I'm going to walk through this chart with you. There are ways that we get knowledge. And Christianity has, for centuries, promoted the truth that all truth is God's truth. In other words, if there is a reality, it flows out of the heart and character of God and His creation, and therefore can be trusted. Now, how we arrive at that, how we learn that information, those avenues of knowledge can come through a couple different ways. They can come through special revelation, which is what? What is special revelation? What's that? The Bible, exactly. The authoritative Word of God. That is God's clearest way of showing us His character, His heart, who He is, and His plans. We understand and make sense of that special revelation through hermeneutics. And for those of you that are going to stick around long enough, you may take that course. There's a course on hermeneutics here at GBS, which is basically how to study the Bible, how to understand it in a way that's consistent with what has been taught throughout the centuries and what the Bible itself clarifies to be true. So this is how you study the Word of God, special revelation. And this creates a body of work called theology. And this is a systematic way of putting beliefs in order in a way that is coherent, effective, true, and helps you live a life that is consistent with what God wants you to do. So let's go on the other side of it, though. In addition to special revelation, you have what's called general revelation. And think of what Paul talked about when he said that we can look up to the heavens and it tells us a bit about who God is. When you look into the fields of science and you see how minute and beautiful and complicated it really is, it tells you that there is a God who's big, a God who's powerful, a God who is methodical, logical. There's a lot you can learn just by studying the creation of the Creator. Are you with me on that? Okay. So how do we understand and make sense of this vast amount of general revelation that we have? Well, that's where the scientific method comes in. Remember, I walked you through that experiment where you have a hypothesis, theory, test, retest, and you keep going through that process? That is the scientific method. That is how you keep digging, digging, and digging until you get down to the bedrock of truth in general revelation. And jumping into psychology, that's where the psychological theories come in. A theory about how we develop personality. We study general revelation using the scientific method, and it helps us understand personality, where that comes from, how we make sense of that, what makes people tick. Now, what happens when these two things disagree? What do we do with that? Anyone want to take a stab? What do we do if these two avenues of knowledge ever disagree? Special revelation, general revelation. We go with the clearest truth that we have, which is special revelation. Now, I would argue that properly understood, if all truth is God's truth coming through general revelation, then it's probably a misunderstanding in our interpretation of general revelation. Are you with me on that? Okay. So that's how we kind of navigate and pick our way through this discussion of psychology versus Christianity. We understand that special revelation is the clearest way of God talking to us and explaining to us what He created and why He created it. While also taking into account the fact that He revealed a lot through general revelation as well. Three elements of scientific inquiry, and basically, what is it that makes for a good scientist? Curiosity. You have to be tenacious in discovering new things and never stop asking the question, why? If you look through some of the great scientists in history, whether that's psychological in nature or medical or anything else, any of the other fields, one thing that sets them apart is a tenacity to get to truth, to understand, to make sense of why things happen the way they do. And that's what drives scientific discovery. Skepticism. Don't be quick to accept what you are hearing, seeing, or thinking as true. The goal is not to be cynical, but cautious. So, you ever met someone who just kind of takes everything at face value and believe it to be true? You ever have anyone in your Facebook feeds that automatically passes on news stories that are clearly false? Okay. They could probably benefit from a little bit of healthy skepticism. All right. And maybe even a little bit of the digging piece that goes along with scientific inquiry. Humility. It helps to discard predictions that can't be verified by research and helps us see our finiteness. The one thing that you may discover as you go through this class and learn about this huge field of psychology is a bit of humility about how much the field doesn't know, how much we don't know about people and human beings and what makes us tick. Sure, we have discovered a ton of stuff along the way in the past 100, 150 years since the field was launched, but there's still a lot of stuff that we don't know, and that requires a healthy sense of humility. I always get a little worried when you hear the kind of the latest and greatest psychologists out there spouting about how they clearly understand everything there is to know about this facet of their field. And I'm thinking, well, humility might be a good thing to have along with your confidence, because the fact of the matter is this field is always developing and there's always new information coming to light. And so having a sense of humility keeps you open to taking on that new information when it comes. Four big ideas in psychology. First of all, critical thinking. The ability to kind of sift through a lot of information, not accept everything at face value, put your thinking cap on. That is one of the essential skills, not just for this class, but for your overall experience in college. We want students to walk away from here being able to analyze, to sift through a lot of information, difficult information with differing viewpoints, and know how to come to a conclusion that's consistent with your faith. And that's what critical thinking is about. The biopsychosocial approach, we can view human behavior from three levels: the biological, psychological, and social cultural influencers. So we share a biologically rooted human nature, yet cultural and psychological influences fine-tune our assumptions, values, and behavior. And as a Christian, I would also say spiritual needs to be a part of that, the spiritual influences on our life. So the basic premise here is that we come hardwired as human beings for certain things. Let's say human connection. Regardless of who you are, where you come from, what continent, regardless of race, ethnicity, whatever, you need human connection. Now, there are other things that play into that. your own preferences. Let's say, for example, introversion versus extroversion. Whether or not you need more or less interaction may be based on some of those pieces. But also social-cultural. Some cultures tend to be very, for lack of a better word, lovey-dovey, okay? Like there's a lot of physical affection, there's a lot of connection, a lot of hugging, arm wrapping around the other person, and some cultures are a little more standoffish. You know, they actually measure the amount of distance a culture feels comfortable with. And for Americans, and I can't remember, I think it's something like 18 inches, you know, about this distance, whereas some cultures, it's like 6 inches. They feel very close. You need to be very close in order to feel comfortable. And so some of that influence is social-cultural. Yeah, based on the seating structure today, you must be very close, so, or some of you not very close. Two-track mind. Our perception, thinking, memory, and attitudes all operate on two levels. Conscious with awareness and unconscious without awareness. Have any of you ever had an experience where you're kind of going through your day and you are just, something is off and you can't figure it out? Either you're very angry or you're very sad and you don't know why. If you've ever had that experience, if you want to be brave, raise your hand. Okay, that's a pretty common human experience. What's going on here? Part of your brain is disturbed, the part that's something's going off deep down inside. And that's the subconscious part of your brain, okay? That's the thing that's on the back burner of your brain. That's still affecting you, it's affecting your behavior, but it's not part of your conscious thought system. It can be helpful to pause and say, you know what, I'm seeing this within me. I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm whatever. I need to pause and figure out what's going on. Why is that there? And then you start backtracking and realize that, oh, I felt slighted by someone I really like earlier today. And I'm having a hard time wrestling with that, so I'm feeling sad. Or, oh, I saw something today that reminded me of a loved one that I lost. And I didn't even register in that moment, but that's been really affecting me. That's been on the unconscious, the back burner of my brain, and it's affecting me, but it's not part of my conscious thought. And exploring human strengths. Psychology today focuses not only on understanding and offering relief from troublesome behaviors and emotions, but also in understanding and building the emotions and traits to help us to thrive. And so I currently work as a mental health counselor and deal with a variety of struggles that people come in with. Trauma and sex addiction are two things that I really focus on in my practice. And when I'm working with someone, I'm not just focused on the problem. I'm not just focused on their failures. I'm focusing on any strengths that they may have that I can build on. Because when you build on a strength, it helps build momentum in a positive direction. And it shows them that success is possible, that change is possible. And so we're not just, every time they come in the door, we're not focusing about how many times and how many ways and how greatly they failed. But instead, we're focusing on building a positive new future. I'm building on strengths. Not ignoring the past, not ignoring pain, but not making that the only thing that we look at. And so that's a shift in psychology because that wasn't always the case. And I think that's probably one of the big things that we can offer. A holistic approach. And this is a pretty important one. A holistic model assumes that human behavior might be described in different ways by different disciplines, each accounting essentially for the same behavior. So think of it this way, and let's take an issue like depression, okay? Depression can have a variety of reasons that it comes to the surface. For some people, it can be very rooted in their biology. Depression can run within certain family systems, and so there's a genetic component that gets passed down from one generation to the next. And there are certain hormones or processes within the brain that lead someone into depression. And if you only try and solve that problem using let's say, certain types of psychotherapy, you may not get to the full solution because there's a huge biological component that's driving that depression. But when you find the appropriate medication that helps restore that balance in their mind, there's a lot that can happen to bring them up to a level of health and functioning. So you have the biological component, you have the psychological component. Let's take someone who maybe they don't have a proclivity to psychology in terms of their genetics, but they live in an environment that is very oppressive, where they're not supported, where they are undermined, threatened, ridiculed, a very unhealthy environment. Maybe this is at home, maybe this is at school, maybe this is at work, whatever. Do you think that that environment has an effect psychologically on someone? Oh, you better believe it does. And it can drive someone into depression. So you can have psychological influences that lead someone there. Or there could be sociological in nature. Sometimes there's something about the societal setting in which they find themselves that drives people into the corners and the dark recesses of life. And in those dark places, depression tends to surface. And so when we say we take a holistic approach, we're not just focusing on one little piece of this person's life. We're looking at the biological components, we're looking at the psychological components, we're looking at the sociological components. And as I said earlier, we're also looking at the spiritual components. So there's a danger in making every physical struggle a spiritual problem. Have you ever met folks who do that? You know, if someone's, let me give you an example, and this was a close family member of mine, was diagnosed with breast cancer. And very young, lived a very healthy life, loved God with all of her heart. A spiritual leader in her life called her father and said, "So tell me what sin your daughter committed that she got breast cancer." That is attributing a physical problem to solely spiritual reasons. Do you see what I'm saying there? And that's a danger. That's a ditch to fall in. On the other hand, I don't want to fall in the other ditch which says that the way you live your life spiritually doesn't have any effect on you physiologically. Because sure, if you're living like the devil and you're running from God with all your heart, would I expect there to be physical consequences to that? Sure, there's going to be some of that going on too. So we're looking for balance. We're looking at truth, okay? We're trying to stay away from the ditches. You get what I'm saying there when it comes to holistic approach? And the diamond there is a way to kind of illustrate that. So you have a whole diamond, but you can look at it from different facets, different sides, and it gives you a complete picture of what's going on inside that diamond. So you're looking at the biological, the physical, the sociological, the spiritual, and you're making sense of someone's struggle based upon that.